Good afternoon, and thank you for being with us for the seventh session of our Recentering the ELA ELD Framework. This session, we are going to focus our attention on content knowledge. And to get us started, I'm going to go over the purpose and goals of today's session, which is to recenter the ELA ELD framework as, again, our primary guide for language and literacy policy and practice in California, as well as share the knowledge about the key content in the framework and establish a foundation for successful and sustainable implementation of the practices and systems that are promoted within the framework. I'm going to do a quick launch. We want to know who's with us here today. And my name is Bonnie Garcia. I'm one of two co-directors for statewide literacy in California. And in a bit, I will introduce my co-director. But first, what I would like to do is relaunch this poll. So I am going to launch this poll, and we want to know who's here with us today. Classroom teacher, paraprofessionals, librarian or a specialist, a family or a community member, instructional coach, school district administrator, and if you scroll down, county office, higher ed programs, organizations. Are you from CDE or another state agency, a policymaker? So I'm going to wait till we get to 80%, and we're almost there. And it's fantastic to see the different roles that we have here with us today, because as we know, in order for there to be a comprehensive literacy system, it takes a village, it takes a whole team. So I am going to go ahead and end the poll, share the results. And what you'll see is we have 29%, almost 30% classroom teachers and paraprofessionals. Thank you for being here. School and district administrators, we're at 22%. Thank you for being here. And we also have higher ed, CDE, and other state agencies, as well as librarians and specialists, instructional coaches, and also policymakers. So thank you. Thank you for being here with us today. And thank you for sharing. Moving forward, we want to remind you that we've had a series of sessions for this for our Recentering California's ELA ELD framework. I will go ahead and put a link in the chat in a second, and it's going to be for our California literacy webpage. And on that webpage, there's a section under webinars that have all of our recordings and guidance documents and presentation slides there for you to access. So we also, I want to point out, and we'll talk about this a little later, we have 2 more sessions coming up after this on assessment and intervention, as well as systems and the literacy roadmap. For today, we're going to do our opening remarks. Then we're going to go over the overview of content knowledge presented by Dr. Spiescher. Then move into content knowledge in the elementary setting presented by Dr. Hallie Yop, and then content knowledge in the middle and high school settings presented by Director Nancy Brennelson. And then we're going to get a little bit of time, depending on how much time we have left, to do a little exploration and discussion of the guidance document that we'll present to you a little later. It has all the resources for content knowledge at your fingertips on this document. So make sure you stay tuned. For today's outcomes, we want you to walk away with the big ideas of content knowledge and that theme of the ELA ELD framework. Also, to identify sections in the framework that guide content knowledge for TK through grade 12, and determine what are the next steps now for using and implementing the framework to expand our knowledge and enhance practices that support students' content knowledge. As we move forward, you'll notice we'll have a couple of pause and reflects. There will be a Padlet that will be shared for you to share your thoughts and comments, and we want you to keep these questions in mind to guide your thinking and to post your comments as we move through. And that is, what is resonating with you as the presenters are going through their content? What are you excited about? What are some key points that you feel you and everyone else should know about? And what might be some questions that you have? For today, I'm going to ask and quickly do a stop share and then ask the co-presenters, Dr. Hallie Yacht, Dr. Pam Spiescher, and Director Nancy Brenelson, to pop on and just say hi. So you will hear from them in a bit, and we will learn a lot from them in a second. So I am now going to reshare. Okay. And now we get to dive in. And now I get to ask Dr. Spiescher. Dr. Spiescher, with all there is to know about content knowledge in the framework, what are some key takeaways that you want to impart on us and that we just need to know?
Well, that's a great question. And as you know, in our short time together, I'm just going to provide a brief overview of sort of set things up for Hallie and Nancy to continue with a little more detail. And part of our job, I think, is to encourage everyone to learn more, dive deeper into the framework. And so hopefully we're going to give you some food for thought and some really exciting preview of things you might want to explore further in the framework. But first of all, thank you everyone for being here. We know you have many, many competing priorities, and we do appreciate you being here. This is such a wonderful community, and we're so thrilled that you're with us today. So the first thing I'd like to do before we jump in, and this is what we always do in our webinars, is we, on the next slide, we just like to ground ourselves in the circles of implementation figure, which is really, I kind of call it the framework in a nutshell. Of course, it doesn't have everything, but it gives you sort of like the map of the framework, the framework's principles and key themes, key ideas. So, and if this is still new for you, don't worry. It's fully explained in chapter 2. And then it's further played out throughout the framework. So the outer ring, though, the orange ring, what that displays is the overarching goals for all of us, for ELA, for literacy instruction across the disciplines, and for ELD instruction. Not just instruction, but also assessment and curriculum. And that goal is that all students are going to be broadly literate with 21st century skills. We're well into the 21st century, so that would be good by the time they graduate. So we know this is a long journey for our students. There's so much robust and wonderful and joyful learning that they do throughout their schooling careers. But by the time they graduate, we want them to be broadly literate with 21st century skills. And we really want them to be ready to pursue whatever college or career or life path they choose. And furthermore, to be prepared to be an informed and active participant in our democracy, which is so critical today. So that's our goal. The white field inside that orange circle, that represents the instructional context that all students should be in, and we should be creating for all students. And that is basically the instructional context that creates the conditions to achieve this goal in the outer ring. So we want all instructional contexts to be motivating, engaging, respectful, culturally and linguistically affirming and sustaining, and really affirming of all students' varied identities. And of course, we want these contexts to be intellectually challenging and integrated. So working in an integrated way across skills and competencies, but also disciplines. At the center of the graphic I'm kind of skipping to the center, but at the center of the graphic are ELA literacy and ELD standards. And we say ELA literacy because it's both. These standards are for both English language arts and literacy across the disciplines, in the disciplines. And so that's something that we're going to talk a lot about today because we're talking about content knowledge. But these standards that we have are ELA literacy and ELD standards. These are the expectations that we have of all students as they progress through the grades, and for the ELD standards as students progress across the proficiency levels. And these are expectations we know that all students can achieve if we provide them with the high quality, assessment-informed, cultural-linguistically sustaining, inclusive, rich, and whole child educational experiences that is their educational right. So circling these two sets of standards, so that's our target. But circling those, what we did was we worked to integrate those two sets of standards into 5 themes. And these are cross-cutting themes that they both merge and integrate both sets of standards across strands and across domains. And really, these are it's really the themes that sort of guide our implementation of the standards. So if that was, as all figures are, all figures try to condense a lot of complex information into a tiny little space. So if that's a little murky for you still, don't worry. There's lots of explanation in chapter 2. See how I'm trying to drive you to chapter 2. Okay, so on the next slide, so remember our goal. Our goal is for all students by the time they graduate to be broadly literate and ready to pursue whatever life path they choose, and to pursue that with confidence. So, and joy, dare I say joy. Joy is a word I'm using a lot lately because I think that's a word we should be using every day in school. So we'll just go with that. So in chapter 2, we wrote quite a bit about this goal, as I said, and this is an excerpt which we took from our ELA literacy standards. And what this excerpt conveys is, it conveys a lot about our collective charge toward achieving the goal. And that is to support students to establish a base of content knowledge across a wide range of subject matter, wide range of disciplines, wide range of content within the disciplines, by engaging with works of quality and substance. So that means intellectually rigorous topics and complex texts that really have a lot of the content knowledge in them. And through our support, students will become proficient in new areas through research, so their own research into topics that we choose, topics that they choose, topics we choose together, and a lot of study. So we want to support all of our students to read purposefully, listen attentively, to gain both general knowledge of the world, and also discipline-specific expertise. So those disciplinary practices and also disciplinary knowledge. And we want students to be able to refine and share their knowledge through writing and speaking, because that's a big part of content knowledge. So I invite you to think about that quote as you read or listen to an excerpt from a recent New York Times article on the next slide. And this is an excerpt that very likely could be used in a high school or even a middle school, but we'll just say a high school ELA or science or social studies class. And I'm just going to read it to you in case you're driving. Earth is likely to cross a critical threshold for global warming within the next decade. And nations will need to make an immediate and drastic shift away from fossil fuels to prevent the planet from overheating dangerously beyond that level, according to a major new report released on Monday. The report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, a body of experts convened by the United Nations, offers the most comprehensive understanding to date of ways in which the planet is changing. It says that global average temperatures are estimated to rise 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, above pre-industrial levels sometime around the first half of the 2030s, as humans continue to burn coal, oil, and natural gas. Those are very long sentences with and very informationally dense 2 paragraphs. So my question to you is, how can the content knowledge that's embedded within this very short these very short 2 paragraphs, how can that content knowledge needed to engage meaningfully with this text be developed? Just think in your head or jot down a few ideas. How do we help students develop that content knowledge? And when I say engage meaningfully, it could be read it analytically. It could be reporting on the information in their own writing or oral presentation. So that's meaningful engagement. Okay, so I know that was just a split second, but on the next slide, I just noted some things that you may have thought to yourself. So how do we help students develop that content knowledge? Well, one way that we help them do that is to prioritize subject matter areas. So to prioritize science, history, social science, visual and performing arts, and even health education, physical and mental health education in the school schedule, including and very importantly in the elementary grades, because we know that by spending more time on content knowledge development, and particularly I'm just going to talk right now about kind of the idea of focusing on content knowledge development in the early grades, in the early years of schooling, and throughout the elementary grades. We know that if we do that, that students will actually do better in literacy. In one recent study that I read about in EdWeek, first through fifth grade students who had an additional 30 minutes of social studies instruction per day outperformed students who received less social studies instruction on ELA tests. So they did better in literacy by having more social studies instruction. And that was even when controlling for students' kindergarten reading abilities and other demographic and school factors. So that's something to chew on. And we also know, I mean, this is sort of logical or intuitive, but we also know that investing in content learning in the early years of schooling will help children throughout the elementary grades, but it'll also help them as they get older, because they're going to need that content knowledge and understanding of disciplinary practices when they get to the higher elementary grades and into secondary schooling. So you may have noted that. You may also have noted that reading and writing complex texts in a variety of disciplines and reading volume, both inside and outside of school, is helpful for developing content knowledge. And this is sort of in the area of wide reading. And to develop content knowledge and to become a good reader, for that matter, you have to read a lot. There's no getting around that. You have to read a lot, and you have to read a lot of different kinds of complex texts, both narrative and informational. So in Chapter 2, we do provide guidance on how to set up an independent reading program, which should be happening from the earliest years through the end of high school. There's just really no replacement for wide reading. So you also may have, and I've alluded to this earlier, but you also may have noted that it's really important to emphasize content area learning from the early years. And as I said earlier, language and literacy develops through meaningful and authentic content learning experiences in science and social studies, for example. And that content learning critically needs to include engagement with high quality science and social studies texts, because that's where a lot of the language is to understand the content. Unfortunately, however, content learning is currently not prioritized for all young children. For example, one study in that same EdWeek, advertising EdWeek for everybody, but in the same EdWeek article, a recent study showed that kindergarten through third grade teachers said they spent a daily average of about 90 minutes on ELA and about 60 minutes on math, which is great, but only about 20 minutes on science and about 15 minutes on social studies. So there is a case to be made to increase those minutes and maybe just kind of keep track of how much time we're spending on the content areas and try to increase that as much as we can. And you may have also thought about all of the different modalities through which content knowledge is developed. And it's not just through reading, it's also through, and especially through hands-on learning, through play, playful learning, through field trips, virtual experiences, explorations and inquiries, projects, discussions, written texts, speeches, demonstrations, presentations, visual and performing arts even, podcasts, or lectures. So there's lots and lots of different creative and motivating, engaging ways to develop content knowledge and language and literacy simultaneously. So that was a lot. I'm sure you thought about all of that as you were reading that expert and thinking about that question. But on the next slide, just to kind of sum up that part of chapter 2, which you will read about, all of that is to say that reading, writing, speaking, and listening and language are tools for acquiring, constructing, and conveying content knowledge. At the same time, content knowledge is necessary for engaging meaningfully and proficiently with complex literacy tasks, with many content, most probably complex literacy tasks. So content knowledge, language, and literacy are inextricably linked, and it's a highly reciprocal process. So on the next slide, as we've done in all of our other webinars, we don't just tell you to do it. We don't just say, go do it, figure it out. We show you models, exemplars of how this can be done. And it's important to remember that in I think in all of our snapshots and vignettes, what you will find is integrated content, language, and literacy learning using complex text and authentic content learning. So those are very important aspects to kind of be thinking about when you read these snapshots and vignettes. And you can see that snapshots that go as early as kindergarten and transitional kindergarten, because we do have some transitional kindergarten examples, we are already talking about content learning and how you can develop both content knowledge and language and literacy in kindergarten, for example, through science. And this is designated ELD. So remember that in previous webinars, we've talked about how designated ELD is amplifying what is happening in content area instruction, whether it's ELA or science or social studies. So you'll have an example here of how that content knowledge is not the focal point in designated ELD, but it is, of course, being reinforced through the focus of language, because it is through language that we convey our content knowledge and we develop content knowledge. And on the right-hand side, snapshot 4.3, you can see another example from science. These are two examples from science, and this is second grade. So this is another designated ELD example about how to help support second graders to understand the language used in science informational texts. And of course, those science informational texts are being used in an integrated science and ELA learning during that time. And the reason I'm kind of pointing out designated ELD is just so you can see the clear focus on how zooming in on language can support both language development and content knowledge development, but how designated ELD is so connected and how it builds into and from content instruction. By the way, anything that's happening in the designated ELD snapshots and vignettes, they're not exclusively activities that have to happen in designated ELD. So if teachers are reading, if you're reading examples from designated ELD instances, you can use those ideas in content instruction too. So I hope that made sense. On the next slide, hopefully this is just a teaser for you to go in and actually read those snapshots. Going up through the grades, you see an example from more in the social studies, history, social studies realm, and also visual and visual arts. So on the left-hand side, this is an instance of doing some sentence combining, but through an examination and analysis of a painting And so this arts education, again, is really critical, beginning in the early grades and needs to last throughout high school. And then on the right-hand side, you can see more of a social studies example where students are diving deeply into linguistics, which is content knowledge, and kind of engaging meaningfully by researching their own language journey. So these are just two little brief examples of how content knowledge development can look as you progress through the grades. And now finally, on the next slide, we have been talking about the vignettes a lot in previous webinars, and I want to just remind you that in each, as you progress through the grades in elementary school, we sort of like go from working in ELA with narrative texts in one grade level. And then the next grade level is going to show you some integrated content area like science or social studies with literacy. So the vignettes are really a place where you can get a lot of ideas for helping students to develop content knowledge. And of course, if you're working on understanding integrated and designated ELD, the vignettes are your go-to tool. That's a great entry point to understand how to do all of these things at once. And this is just an example from 7th grade where students are reading You Are What You Eat, and also, so they're learning about agribusiness, content knowledge, and they're also learning about language and literacy. And so and I think there's one more set of vignettes. So that goes all the way through high school. This is TK through 12. You'll find lots and lots of examples. This is an example of unpacking some history texts. So this is sort of an integrated ELA history, social studies unit of study where they are reading some core texts and unpacking their meanings. And so they're learning some analytical skills, and they're also learning content. How many times have I said the word content in my little brief 15 minutes? I don't know. I hope somebody was telling. Okay, back to you, Bonnie.
Thanks, Pam. I am now going to move us into our first pause and reflect. And already, Dr. Spiescher, we received a comment in the Q&A about the kudos to using an excerpt that's climate related. So please make sure to put those in the Padlet. I will put the link to the Padlet in the chat right now. Give me 1 second. And let me do that because I'm going to show you that Padlet just one time. So here we go. And that Padlet looks like, let me see, actually might look, here we go. And the Padlet looks just like this. So thank you for the person who noted that. We're going to give you a few seconds, 30 seconds to start writing in some thoughts. And again, what is resonating with you? What are you excited to hear? What questions do you have? And it looks like we have somebody who said this is a wonderful concrete example of global warming. Yes, thank you. Content instruction is important. Thank you for adding that. While you continue to add some of those comments, and we are encouraging you to do so because we're going to dive into those at the very end of this presentation, I am now going to introduce you to Dr. Hallie Yap. So she, again, one of the authors of the framework, and she is going to talk to us about content knowledge in elementary schools. So Dr. Yap?
Thank you, Dr. Garcia, and thanks, Dr. Spiescher, for setting us up to discuss content knowledge in the elementary school and beyond. And you'll hear a lot of overlapping ideas of how we discuss application into these years. And thanks also to the participants who are starting to comment on the Padlet. That's always good to see what your thoughts are. Would you put us on the next slide, Bonnie? I'd like to start by sharing several key points we make in the framework. First, as Pam noted, a reciprocal relationship exists between literacy and language development and content knowledge. Knowledge plays a significant role in meaning making with text, with language development, being able to effectively express or communicate ideas, opinions, thoughts, and so on. And literacy and language development provide students with the tools to independently access, acquire, and construct domain and general world knowledge. The more skilled children are in the language arts, the more they can learn about their worlds. The more knowledge they acquire, the richer their engagement as readers, writers, speakers, and listeners, and language learners. A second key point we argue in the framework is that content area instruction should be given adequate time during the school day. So though Pam just talked about the recent article in EdWeek, 10 years ago, we were writing about this, and there is research related to this, building of children's background knowledge. So we argue that, yes, though we wrote the ELA literacy ELD framework, we don't want that to consume everything in a school day because we know how important all those other subjects are. So it should be given, content area instruction should be given adequate time in the school day, including during the earliest years of schooling. And all learners should have full access to content area instruction. This means careful consideration should be given to the timing of special services, crucial as they are. But we need to pay attention that we don't disrupt subject matter learning for children. Additionally, content area instruction should include attention to literacy and language development in the subject matter, along with not replacing subject matter appropriate pedagogy. That is, as again, Pam mentioned, some of those things are hands-on investigations, explorations, inquiries, projects, demonstrations, discussions, so for virtual tours, etc. And finally, it's important to point out that the ELA ELD framework calls for an integrated and interdisciplinary approach to the teaching of the language arts. In fact, you see this displayed in our circles of implementation graphic. We keep going back to that because it does capture these big ideas in implementation of ELA literacy and ELD standards. You will see that an integrated approach is identified as part of the context in which the standards are implemented. Next slide, please. This relates to that integrated and interdisciplinary approach. One of the ways you see it in the framework is through those quick glimpses into the classroom that we provide. Pam spent a few minutes on that. I'll just say that early on, we were charged, early on in the process of writing a framework, we were charged to include scenarios. We call them snapshots or vignettes in which the ELA and ELD standards are integrated into different content areas. Thus, you'll see many snapshots and vignettes throughout the framework, and in each, we identify the standards that could be emphasized in the activity or instruction described, including not only the ELA literacy and ELD standards, but also standards from the relevant content areas, whether it's science, social studies, visual arts, math, and so forth. So you will find those called out in these vignettes and these snapshots. Next slide. In the TK through grade 5 content knowledge sections of the framework, and we'll take you to those in that guidance document that Bonnie mentioned earlier, but in those sections on content knowledge, we highlight 3 ways that content knowledge can be developed along with language and literacy. One of these is through wide reading. Texts are a valuable source of general and domain-specific knowledge. Students in every grade level benefit by engaging in wide reading. Teachers in all grade levels should share and make available a wide range of texts. These include stories, dramas, poems, folktales, fantasy, realistic fiction, myths from diverse cultures and different time periods, all of which contribute to literary and cultural knowledge, as well as domain knowledge, as well as familiarity with various text structures and elements. Figure 2.2 in Chapter 2 shares the range of text types that children should be experiencing In the case here, in the elementary schools, that figure extends further and shares through the high school as well. Teachers and schools should have well-stocked libraries. I want to say that again. And I know that finances are an issue, but everyone needs to hear it loud and clear. We need the support to have well-stocked libraries in our classrooms and our schools. In addition to sharing a wide range of text, teachers should carefully select text at times to build content knowledge. For example, teachers should have access to collections of texts on a topic that's understudied so that opportunities exist for a coherent rather than just a haphazard building of knowledge. Our librarians, where we have them, can assist in ensuring high quality collections of books on same topics or related topics. We also call for children to have the opportunity to pursue texts of their choice. Yes, subject matter curriculum drives what we do in each grade level, but children's interests should as well. There should be space for children to pursue information that interests them, that excites them, that connects to their experiences, that expands their worlds. There are many reasons for ensuring that children engage in wide reading, and chief among these are that it leads children to becoming broadly literate, one of those overarching goals in the outer ring that Pam mentioned earlier, and that they gain considerable knowledge. Another important one is that children discover that texts are interesting, informative, and worth reading, which then propels them to further reading and knowledge acquisition and construction. Next slide, please. In addition to wide reading, in those sections on content knowledge and throughout the framework, we also highlight engaging children with informational text. Both literary and informational texts contribute to students' knowledge of the world and the human experience. Infotexts in particular are a considerable source of knowledge that students can acquire as they move through their years of schooling. As I noted earlier, attention to knowledge building begins in the earliest years. In our section on TK, we provide a figure. You'll see just a screenshot of it here. This figure provides suggestions for ways to ensure that our youngest children, preschool, TK, early on, their exposure and access to informational text, suggestions for how we do that. By the way, we don't adhere to a learn to read, then read to learn model. Reading to learn should be happening from the onset through read alouds, through dictated stories, through drawings as children communicate knowledge that they have and as they're building that knowledge. It is not delayed. Reading to learn is not delayed until a set of skills are acquired. It is happening. It is co-occurring from the very first moment that we have children under our care. The ELA literacy standards, of course, include standards related to informational text, and there are writing and speaking and listening standards as well that are related to informational written and oral text. Next slide, please. On this slide, we provide a caution, and this is a quote taken from the framework. You'll see on page 414. It's important that students who are experiencing difficulty with reading are supported as they learn from text. Children should not avoid using text with students who find them challenging and rely only on non-text media and experiences. Replacing text with other sources of information, in spite of the intention to ensure access across the curriculum, ultimately limits students' skills to independently engage with text in the future. In other words, instruction should be provided that enables all students to learn with text alongside other learning experiences, again, such as inquiry, hands-on experiences, teachers' presentations, demonstrations, class discussions, audio, visual media, and so forth. Instruction should be provided that enables all students to learn with text alongside other experiences. Next slide, please. When we comment that one way of supporting knowledge development is through engaging with informational text, we mean both as readers and writers and discussants. On this slide are images of it's an informational text sample written by a first grader, along with an annotation that aligns with the grade level writing standards. Samples like this are given throughout the framework. You'll see examples of narrative writing for a grade level. You'll see examples of informational writing and so forth. Engaging with informational text means as a writer as well. Next slide. Additionally, we support children's knowledge development through providing opportunities to engage in research. So that's the third subcategory in the larger category of developing content knowledge. Wide reading, engaging with informational text, and engaging in research. And this too starts in the earliest grades. In grades K2, Writing Standard 7 calls for students to participate in shared research and writing projects. In grade 3, they conduct short research projects, and this becomes more sophisticated as they move through grades 4 and 5. Research projects, of course, some are completed in the course of a few hours, or they may be engaged in over an extended time frame. Writing Standards 7 and 8 as well draw on this notion of students engaging and sharing research. Next slide, please. Research projects have many benefits. They foster motivation, and this is especially true when children have choices about the topics that they can pursue. Research projects provide authentic reasons to make use of and to expand language and literacy skills as children explore, as they communicate, as they use text resources, as they write and present their knowledge. And they promote content knowledge development as children discover, and as they build their networks of knowledge. I'd just like to sum up my part here by saying the framework recognizes the importance of content knowledge and its reciprocal relationship with language and literacy development. It is the reason it is one of those 5 cross-cutting themes of the ELA-ELD focus on curriculum and instruction as displayed in our circles of implementation graphic. Bonnie?
Thank you, Dr. Yap, for that. And this will take us into our second pause and reflect. I will go ahead and put that link again for the Padlet in the chat. And please remember to share with us what's resonating with you, what's exciting you, what questions might you have, anything you want to point out that you think we should know or that others should know. So please feel free to post your comments while our presenters are sharing. And so now, without further ado, I get to present my co-director, Nancy Brennelson, who is going to go over content knowledge in middle school and high school. So Nancy, can you tell us, now that we've heard the overview of content knowledge and Dr. Yap's covered what it is in the elementary setting, what does it now look like? What does it mean for the middle school and high school settings?
Now that students have moved into some of the most creative and formative years of their lives, lots of brain development in those teenage years, we're hoping that content knowledge really hooks them and keeps them interested and motivated in school, and that we really take advantage of the connections between literacy and all the content areas. So next slide. There are 4 major areas in the chapters for middle school and high school, chapters 6 and 7 in the framework, that we address. And the first of those areas is disciplinary literacy. Now, children have been experiencing disciplinary literacy all along as they've been experiencing books and other texts, informational texts in different content areas. We start to address it formally in the framework in grades 6 through 8. And you'll see a figure here from chapter 6 that really depicts what it is that these experts in these areas do, how they think, and how they use language. So scientists, historians, mathematicians, and language arts experts. Next slide. Continuing on in that same vein, in Chapter 7, we look at more detail about how it is that these experts use reading, writing, and language to build knowledge and communicate ideas in the disciplines. And so this is another figure that you may find useful in exploring with your colleagues how it is that literacy really transcends all the subject areas. And as Hallie finished by saying, the reciprocity between content knowledge and literacy skill is so important. Okay, next slide. Moving on to another big area within this theme. You've been hearing from both Pam and Hallie about the importance of informational texts and how they provide rich opportunities for literacy development, including vocabulary, language development, and critical thinking. Again, more snapshots showing you examples of how this is done in the classroom. This is in grade 6, and this is world history integrated with literacy. Next slide. Expanding on that, it would be remiss of me to not mention that literature is a discipline and a content area. You saw that in the examples from disciplinary literacy, and I'd like to highlight that for you now. In fact, that we have samples in Chapter 7 of paired literacy, paired literary texts and informational texts, how you can make text sets to engage students with these ideas in different ways and using different genres. Lots of nuggets throughout the framework, and one that you might not have noticed is that in both Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, we have some information on research-based learning techniques, or study skills, if you will. And in fact, in Chapter 7, there's a chart that really highlights the research around which strategies really have the highest impact in terms of helping students remember what it is that they're trying to learn. Thank you. Next slide. Moving on to one of our favorite topics, both Pam and Hallie highlighted this, research. Opportunities to engage in research contribute to students' content knowledge. That is critical, and it requires students to engage in their literacy practices. So they have to read about their topic, write about their topic, engage with others, and present on their topic. Following on from the standards you looked at for kindergarten through grade 5, you'll see that the writing standards in grades 6 through 8 ask students to conduct short research projects. Moving on to grades 9 through 12, sustained research projects. And then in standard 8, we're really looking at that relevant information. Students have been doing that all along from kindergarten. They've been looking at details. They've been looking at the evidence for or the details that support what they've been reading. Now we're using advanced searches in grades 9 and 10 to assess the usefulness of sources. And in grades 11 and 12, assessing the strengths and limitations of each source and integrating that information into the text, which is an art in itself. We would highlight for you the model school library standards because they identify a number of competencies that support students in their research efforts. And in high school, as I wish it were in every school, there are librarians who will support teachers in this work. Moving on to the next slide in research, Yes, another snapshot that shows students engaging in research, providing rich opportunities to develop their deep content understandings and their disciplinary literacy knowledge and skills. Snapshot 6.11 shows you integrated ELD, as all of our snapshots and vignettes do, in science. It's a science topic in which students are learning to read and write arguments in science, work collaboratively, and develop their English language proficiency. This is a bit longer than some of our other snapshots, but it's a nice illustration of all of those things in practice. Moving to the next slide then. So there's a payoff here, and that is in the area of CASP, grades 6 through 8 and 11. Notice that the CASP, as you know, is organized by 4 claims: reading, listening, writing, and research. And 19.2% of the items on the CASP are related to research, developing questions, finding information, etc. That's true all the way from grade 3 up through 8 and then in 11. And I would point out that on the score report that students will receive this year for the 2024 CASP administration, provides parents with some information about how students have done in performance areas. So combining reading and listening and combining writing and research. I always say it's critical that children, young students, learn to read, decode, and code well, and are solid in their foundational skills. And they need to advance in their reading. And as Hallie said, there's no replacement for reading text as a way of engaging with content. But writing is also critically important, and research is a big part of it. One last point here, and that is that on the same score report for the 2024 CASP, parents will also receive the essay scores on a 4-point scale for each of 3 areas, as you see here: organization and purpose, development and elaboration, and conventions. So all of these things fit together and are important for content knowledge and advancing literacy. Last slide, wide reading. Both Pam and Hallie emphasized the need for students to become broadly literate. And there is a nice section in chapter 2, another nugget that you might not have noticed if you're only looking at the grade level chapters, on wide and independent reading and how to plan an independent reading program, which is so critical. It needs to be in every school and every classroom. And what we know for our youngest children who are still learning to decode, that reading aloud is their ticket for engaging with the world of literature and informational texts. There are sections on planning for wide reading, short sections in both chapter 6 and chapter 7 on the pages we've noted. So we bring together really all of the themes with content knowledge and how they advance students' knowledge and advance their literacy practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Dr. Spiescher, and thank you, Dr. Yap. I will now move us into a time to explore and reflect. In the chat, I am including the Padlet and then also a link to a guidance document that we're going to be using for today's Explore and Reflect. So let me share that. And first of all, wow, thank you for all of the commentary so far and the posts. Please keep them coming. We now point you in the direction of this guidance document. And in this guidance document, you'll have specific information around content knowledge across the different chapters of the framework with the page numbers for you to go to and to access. So you'll have that. And then there's also all of the other webinar guidance documents that you can find that were provided for our webinars and that you can also find on our California Literacy webpage. Then we have the resource links for the ELA, ELD Framework, and other related documents, as well as additional resources. So a lot of really good information. There's even joyful reading and creative expression, which we'll share a little bit more about. Dr. Spiescher will in a second. But please take this time to go through it. And then we will take this time to look through the commentary here. And Dr. Spiescher, Nancy, Dr. Yop, if you want to, turn on your cameras and unmic, talk about what you're seeing, please.
I've been enjoying reading the comments in the Padlet. Give people about a minute of quiet time. It's hard to type in reflections when other people are talking. One of the things I have been noticing in the Padlet is people have been appreciating the content or the topics used in a lot of our in our examples today, but in our snapshots and our collective vignettes and snapshots. And we really did focus on texts and topics that are of high interest to students, because that's also of great importance. So somebody was commenting on the importance of addressing the topic of climate change or addressing nutrition and healthy eating. And so that is another really critical aspect of this whole enterprise of integrating the themes and thinking about content knowledge is the content really matters. The topic in the content area that you're addressing really matters. Not only for developing knowledge of the world that is current and students are highly interested in, but also the language to be able to communicate, to write about perspectives, or to present about one's perspective, or to engage in deep conversations about the content. So just wanted to point that out, something I was noticing.
Any other noticing?
I was appreciating the question about, or the exclamation that I saw in the Q&A about, golly, research and writing are almost 50% of the CASP. And I think I can look that up for you. Maybe I'll put that in the chat for grades 3 through 5 as well. I think it's a similar percentage. So it's good to remind ourselves.
Nancy, there's a question you might want to talk about, and obviously Hallie and I could jump in, but there's a question about, and we have talked about this internally. We talk about this a lot amongst ourselves, but somebody says, I'm seeing a lot of middle school teachers using audio books instead of providing students with books they read themselves. They're listening to the text without engaging independently with books. Can you address how much independent reading should be done in secondary?
Well, I'll address it on two fronts. One, in secondary, students need to be reading their textbooks. They need to be reading whatever literary or informational texts are assigned for instruction. And they may need to be supported to do that reading. They may need scaffolding to be successful. And of course, there are students who will still need intervention, and we need to make sure that that is provided so that along that continuum of support, a la MTSS, we're providing not just universal, but supplemental and intensified support. Independent reading is critical too. The more volume of reading, and I noticed you had that word in one of your slides, Pam, the more, and the volume, not only of reading, but writing as well. So it's hard. I've been with teachers who've said, but my kids just can't read this, and we're not going to get through this if I don't either read it to them or use the audiobook. And so we need to solve that together, and we need to find ways to scaffold it so that students are really reading the text that they have before them.
And I'll just jump in to say that something I have often heard or seen is that there's a perception that multilingual learners, particularly EL identified students, particular students who are newcomers to our country and at emerging levels of English language proficiency, are not capable of engaging with content area texts or content topics, and that's just not true. Actually using robust, intellectually rich content disciplinary texts is a wonderful way to learn English. And I was a high school English language development teacher, so I experienced how this can be challenging because not every student is the same and everybody has different needs, but it is possible, and it is very motivating to be seen as a capable and intellectually, capable, use the word again, learner. Will a student who is a newcomer to English understand every single word all the time? Probably not, but reading a lot is how you actually learn to read better. And all of that content knowledge that is in those intellectually rich texts is getting through. Obviously, there's a lot of support and scaffolding that is involved, but we need to make sure that we're not sort of dumbing down the curriculum for any student, but in this instance, especially our EL identified students in the secondary grades.
And Pam, I really appreciate you mentioning maintaining level of rigor for students. That means looking at that standard and really making sure that you're addressing it. And as you said, just keeping it rigorous and still challenging for students. And then, I worked in special education for years, and I also understand that sometimes, it really depends on the student, and we have to also think about giving them access to their grade level materials, and when is that appropriate, and when can they actually, when is providing that text to speech a good time for them and per their accommodations. So making sure that all of those things are being taken into account when deciding, is text to speech or speech to text the right thing for my student? Is that going to bring down the level of rigor or not? So, and just, is it going to give them access? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a big thing. So thank you for including that.
And if I may, I'd just like to circle back to the notion of it's the text itself that matters too. What is the subject of that text? What is the topic? And find things that kids are interested in, that resonate with them and so forth. But you can't, sometimes they're just things that need to be read, right? This content area textbook or this work of literature. So what do we do as teachers beforehand to spark the interest, to help the kids make the connections? It's part of our job is to evoke a lot of enthusiasm so that kids will persist through the reading. So that we need to not only pay attention to what we're asking them to read, but how we promote their enthusiasm, their interest, their curiosity, and so forth, so that they're more willing to engage in that.
We need to make it tantalizing and to model for them what rich language sounds like and a particularly moving passage in something. So we don't want to indicate that we never read aloud. Of course we do. We do it for a number of purposes. I go back to the independent reading and connecting kids with texts that they want to read, things that they're interested in. Yes, we want them to read broadly across many genres, but we want to really motivate them. And the last thing I'll say, and so many of the snapshots and vignettes have such good examples of unpacking texts, analyzing texts for what it is that they may challenge students with, vocabulary, structures, etc. And all those examples of deconstructing or unpacking texts so that they're understandable are really ways that we can help our students who are struggling, particularly at the secondary level.
And I apologize, Nancy. I was trying to set up the next slide and it came up. I was not wanting to cut you off because that was a really good.
Not a problem.
So, I think if we're okay to move on to the next part.
Can I just point something out that I was really excited I'm so excited reading everybody's comments. So please keep posting them. But there's one comment, if you can scroll up higher, Bonnie. As a teacher candidate, so thank you for being here, teacher candidates. I'm so excited that you're here and that you're finding that the framework in chapter 2, the chart on chapter 2 specifically, is very helpful to you. So spread the word, share the joy of the framework with your peers in your program. Okay, now over to you, Bonnie.
Okay. All right. Well, we've come to questions and answers, so we really have a lot of time to talk about the comments on the Padlet, any other concerns, questions, concerns that folks might have that came up through the Padlet or in the Q&A. And that we wrap up with, again, reinforcing the ELA ELD framework and the 5 cross-cutting themes, as well as all of the other work that goes along with ensuring that we're implementing that with fidelity. So I am going to move to next steps, but Dr. Spiescher, Director Brennelson, Dr. Yap, if there is anything that you want to stop and add, please feel free to just jump in. Moving into next steps, though, reminding you that on April 9th, we will have our 8th session on assessment and intervention on April 9th, we're going to have that. And on May 14th, we'll have our last session, our 9th session, I can't believe it, on systems for implementation. And then Nancy and I am so excited that we're going to be able to share more information on the California Literacy Roadmap at that time. So I also want to give Dr. Spiescher some time to share this really great opportunity. Dr. Spiescher?
Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to share. This is a really, not to webinar you out, you might be getting webinar fatigue, but on April 2nd, we want to invite you to a webinar called Joyful Literacy at School and at Home. And this is, the main focus of this webinar is to share a planning guide that was developed through the Institute of Education Sciences, through the Regional Educational Laboratory West. It's called Joyful Reading and Creative Expression for Young Children, and it's a planning guide. So it's a guide to help you, if you're an early childhood teacher, or all the way up through elementary school. I think it actually can be useful to plan robust interactions with complex and culturally affirming storybooks. So this content area is literature, and the planning guide, again, is designed to support those early experiences with intellectually challenging ideas that are in literary texts, are wonderful storybooks. So how do you do dialogic reading so that all children are engaged and interacting and talking excitedly and about the text? How do you unpack the text to help children understand how stories are constructed and what kind of language is used in stories, and how do you support children to write their own stories? So that's what it's about. And we are currently engaged, the Braille West and part of the Braille West, we're currently engaged in a partnership with the Sacramento County Office of Education. So Julie Montali and Stephen Hicks from the Sacramento County Office of Education are going to be joining us to talk about how they have been implementing the planning guide in their work with early learning providers and teachers, and even at family events like kindergarten roundups. So that'll be really exciting. And Sarah Neville Morgan, who is the Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction for the Opportunities for All branch at CDE, will also be joining us. She is one of our advisory partners, as are Bonnie and Nancy, and Hallie is also joining the fun. So this is a really, as our subject matter expert, so this is a really fun enterprise, this joyful literacy enterprise. So we're going to share the planning guide and share our plans for the future. Hope you come, and I hope this was enough to excite you to come.
In the chat, you will see a link to our survey for today's session. You will also see the link to register for this Joyful Literacy webinar event. So here's our feedback survey. If you have any questions that you would like to address to Nancy or me, please feel free to reach out. We have our email addresses, and we actually share our phone numbers here. So please feel free to reach out. We always love to hear from the field. And thank you.